Thank you, Stephen. A number of guests duly introduced by fellows beg leave to attend your meeting. Is it your pleasure that I welcome them in your name? Thank you. Minutes.
Thursday, the 27th of March, were read and signed. The following communication was then made before the Society after Epiphany, how the British arts and crafts movement transformed American stained glass in the early 20th century by Peter Cormack, MBE, FSA. Thanks were returned for this communication. The President announced that the next meeting would be on Thursday, the 10th of April, and then adjourned the meeting. A reception followed.
Is it your pleasure that I sign these minutes as a true and complete record? Thank you very much. Elections.
The following fellows were elected in the ballot, which closed on the 3rd of April. Mr. Nicholas Crane, the Very Reverend Dr. Mark Oakley, Professor Alice T. Friedman, Professor Stuart Pryor, Dr. Rachel McLean, Dr. Iona Crowley, Dr. Almahari Salman, Dr. Michael Loy, Dr. Philip Martin Cox, Dr. Alexandra Fletcher, Mr. Sebastian Fry, Professor Mark Alexander, Mr. Dickon Love, Dr. Michael A. Hodder, Mr. Michael Vaughan Cooper, Dr. Gregory Alden, Mr. Michael Bamforth.
Thank you. Admissions.
The following being in attendance and having signed the obligation required by the statutes desired to be admitted as a fellow. Lorenzo Calvelli. Lorenzo Calvelli.
Lorenzo, by the authority and in the name of the Society of Antiquaries of London, I admit you a fellow thereof. Welcome and congratulations. We now come to the main business of this evening's meeting, which is to hear our lecture. Thank you, everyone, for your forbearance. Peter's train was disastrously delayed and cancelled, so I'm very grateful to him for staying with us and arriving, albeit a little late, so that we can hear his paper. Peter is a lecturer in architectural history at the Welsh School of Architecture at Cardiff University. He's a fellow of the Society. He worked extensively on antiquarian forgery and the Gothic Revival. His Lever Hume Early Career Fellowship at Manchester Metropolitan University, 2016 to 19, examined the former and the Gothic Revival. And his monograph, Intimacies of George Shaw, 1810 to 1876, Diaries and Correspondence of an Architect, Antiquary, Forger, recently published, forms the subject of his lecture this evening. It's the first work to present the extensive edited and annotated transcripts of Shaw's diaries, provides unparalleled insights into Shaw's architectural and antiquarian interests. He's also published extensively on Gothic design, including Georgian Gothic, medieval architecture, furniture and interiors, 1730 to 1840, published in 2016, and Unbuilt Strawberry Hill, published in 2023. So he's lecturing to us this evening on the subject of George Shaw. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here, not least due to the fact I have been on 3 trains and it's taken 4 hours to get from Cardiff instead of 1 hour, 50 minutes. I was very worried that I was going to miss this slot, so thank you all very much for your forbearance and patience. And gosh, yes, what to say? I've got many, many thanks to record, naturally through a project that's been ongoing for 6 years, including Jonathan Foyle and Ian Coulson, who first introduced me to George Shaw 6 years ago. For numerous colleagues who have had to deal with me through the process of finding, transcribing, editing and understanding George's writings, of which there is an awful lot, yet a huge amount missing, yet still to find. So this book, The Intimacies of George Shaw, was very generously supported by the Albert Dawson Educational Trust, of which there are a number of trustees in the room. So thank you very much. Without you, this would not have been possible. This has been a huge amount of work, and there's yet more to come when I find the manuscripts. And I must thank the British Academy that's awarded me some seed funding research to try and unearth yet more. So thank you to everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the support. And I hope to, in the next 40 odd minutes, take you into the wonderful, confusing, perplexing, but also very exciting world of George Shaw. George effectively has, despite the efforts of numerous local historians in West Yorkshire and on the periphery of Greater Manchester, he is largely anonymous. He does have a Wikipedia entry, though, which is not complete. He was born in 1810 in Uppermill, Saddleworth, next to the Saddleworth Moors, which I'm sure we're all aware of. And he died in the same house in 1876. So he is really, obviously he lasts a lot longer, but he's a contemporary of the great A.W.M. Pugin, yet the two of them have completely different profiles. Eastlake, for example, in the history of the Gothic Revival, didn't mention Shaw. And he has, I would like to think, because of that omission, bearing in mind that it was published only shortly after Shaw's death, that he's really faded from view. But as the image here, and I promise I will move on. This image is a photograph taken by Shaw of the inside of the house that he created for himself in Uppermill. The house he was born in, the house he died in. He created for himself one of the most incredible romantic interiors that I think I have ever seen. There are certain experts in the room, so I look forward to some discussion on this a bit later. But he's really quite remarkable. Not only what he amassed, but also the networks that he enjoyed. This is George on the left-hand side. You can see the helmet, the armor resting on his lap, with one of his nephews to the right, of course, holding some books or manuscripts. A bit of context. George grew up as the first of 9 children of a family owning and operating woolen mills in Yorkshire, from the Shaws and Radcliffes. Those were the 2 heavyweight, armigerous, aristocratic landholding families in the region. However, George's parents were certainly not wonderful landholding families or armigerous. What I'm going to do is show you over the course of the next 35 minutes the ways in which George compensated for that and really went to town. As an 18-year-old, and his first diary from 1829 records from January that year, George, as an 18-year-old, traveling the country as an agent operating on behalf of his parents. He was incredibly diligent. He walked a huge distance and or took gigs and or other modes of transport. and travelled from this area on the periphery of Greater Manchester up north into Scotland as far as Perth, Glasgow, Edinburgh, St Andrews, which has particular significance to me, and primarily on the west coast, always via Carlisle, which, for those who guess and read this, published by the Cheetham Society, rather appropriately, will appreciate the significance of the Carlisle Coffee House. Going south, he ventured down as far as Birmingham. On his tours, selling cloth, it struck me reading his diaries and transcribing how incredibly diligent he was. He was very much aware, in the face of this struggling economy, that he was working for the family to help support them in their enterprise. So it's very mercantile. But whenever he had completed his appointments for those days, and frankly, quite how he arranged those appointments, I'm not entirely sure, lots of writing was going on, he would make a beeline to the most significant and or interesting piece of architectural remains in the vicinity and or country house and or remains from any period whatsoever. He was an omnivore, and he drew, studied, recorded, engaged with antiquarian texts on any subject whatsoever. There isn't quite time, but there's a wonderful passage where he goes to a Shropshire country house. And this passage took me an awful long time. I was staring at my computer, looking at the photograph of the manuscript diary, thinking, what does this say? Because George's handwriting is incredibly difficult. What does it say? George, sorry, I should refer to him as Shaw. It's just because I feel terribly intimate with him, having read all his diaries. But Shaw proceeded to the front entrance of this country house in Shropshire and expected, by right of his own credentials, to be let in. A menial appeared at the door. Now, he writes a consequential menial. Now, of course, I assumed inconsequential, but then actually thought, no, I'm not entirely sure that's what Shaw's scribble says. Consequential menial. George felt that he had, quite literally, a God-given right to get into that house, to survey it, to see what the owner had collected, assembled, the way that the owner used the country house to present his own qualifications. So I think that gives you an insight into Shaw and Shaw's character. He is incredibly forthright, entitled, and the fact that he was working as a door-to-door salesman, effectively, was neither here nor there. He had a higher calling, and that higher calling is represented by what he did to the family house here at St Chad's. Not only did he rename it from Uppermill to St Chad's, the name of the relatively local saint, but he significantly reconfigured it in a wonderful piece of rather dodgy antiquarian logic, which I will try and get to a bit later. He extended it to the right-hand side with 3 gabled additions, one of which was a chapel, and added a tower. He used this building not only as the base of operations for his architectural practice, but also as a statement of his own identity, i.e. the identity of the Shaws and the Radcliffes, which he revelled in. Rather excitingly, I've got absolutely no idea who the person on the left-hand side is. I would like to assume it's George, but what we can see in this rather curious ink on tracing paper sketch is an antiquary sat in a Gothic chair at a Gothic desk, almost. I don't know whether they're trousers. I've always assumed that it's sort of like a cassock that he's wearing. But anyway, irrelevant. Surrounding him, we've got arms and armor and antiquarian treatises. To the walls, we can see the Gothic decorations. We can see the compartments on the ceiling. But also, crucially, can you see in the back, heraldry. It is a room stuffed full of everything he loved. This is undated, but I would guess it's going to be around about 1850 or thereabouts. On the right-hand side, this is a self-portrait. This is a self-portrait of Shaw in a ridiculous chair, polishing, or rather cleaning, Goliath's sword, which he writes about having acquired and added it as a glorious addition to his collection. And what we can do is actually, and this is really quite interesting, on the left-hand side, I should say today, Shaw's house is now Uppermill Public Library, so you are free to go in. It remained after George's death in the, well, probate took 10 years for some goodness knows why reason, and valued his estate at only £10. But it eventually, through descent, was transferred into the ownership of Oldham City Council. The chimney piece you can see behind this figure on the right-hand side, so the chimney piece to the left of the figure on the right, is what we see today in the entrance hall to Shaw's house. This is what we can tell through his diaries, the reconfiguration of the Barrow-Shaw bed. The bed that came from Barrow-Shaw Hall, quite what the bed looked like when George acquired it on one of his ramblings. We've got no idea, but that is it today. And on top, we've got a royal achievement, dendro dated to 1715. Interesting. But anyway, this is the character of George, George's collection, and you can see on the right-hand side the suit of armor above the table. So this is a sense of George the collector, George the, Shaw the collector, Shaw the designer, Shaw the antiquarian romantic interior creator thereof. So, at some point, around the mid to late 1830s, when helpfully his diaries don't exist because he stopped recording them, he starts to become an architect. But not only an architect of churches, an architect of houses, an interior decorator in that he would supply furniture to augment existing medieval churches, extend churches, produce painted glass, cast iron firebacks, encaustic tiles, tombstones, whatever you needed, Shaw was able to do it. And he operated primarily through the network of antiquarian vicars and their own networks through the Vicar of Rochdale, Reverend William Hay, involved in the Peterloo massacre, and also other connected antiquaries such as Sir Samuel Rush Meyrick, and I've got an interesting manuscript I just came across a few days ago. I'm going to show you a bit later. But anyway, he could do everything. Not particularly well to some. I do like this quote. It's from the 2011 Pevsner Guide for Cheshire. This house, this church, St. Mark's in Dunham, close to Dunham Massey, from 1864 to 66, writes about the material. The tough style and Saddleworth stone look out of place in genteel Cheshire. The Shaw gaucheries are unmistakable. I'm not entirely sure that would actually pass muster today, but also in terms of this statement, what are architectural gaucheries? That's a question we could perhaps look at later. But there are certain characteristics that Shaw repeats, ad nauseum through all his work. His architectural interiors, his architectural exteriors, his furniture. You can tell a piece of Shaw by looking at it. It has certain characteristics, certain hallmarks, which are unmistakable. So, his house. Today, this is Uppermill, and Uppermill Library, and as I said, he extended it. He added these gables, the wonderful set piece of antiquarian research I'm going to show you a bit later, but this is an example of what he did to frankly, pimp up an existing piece of architecture that he found deeply dissatisfying. Another example, this grand house, Warmton Tower, close by for a local well-to-do mill owner, was produced in the 1850s with an array of painted glass. Note the fringed or mantled hourglass royal shield in the center. That is a George shore motif, and plus also the rugged style. Other grander architecture, you could say, is the church at Llanfairfechan in North Wales. He produced for another local Uppermill resident, John Platt. And I think the exterior, the tower and the spire are really quite characteristic of George, quite often with this very noticeable projecting staircase turret to the tower. You can all usually see Shaw's architecture through the spires. It's on the interior where he quite often repeats the exact same forms of canopies, the exact same types of shields, and also the windows. We can see that he's fond of the quatrefoil, although frankly, who wasn't? What he's particularly fond of, though, and you can see this in the central window, are the pair of mouchette wheels, these pairs of mouchettes. Why? Well, the wonderful suggestion, and he applies these mouchette wheels everywhere, to his furniture, to his architecture, and even these quatrefoils, mouchette wheels, and then canted quatrefoils, they appear in the same sequence on his churches. So he's got a set sequence of window tracery. He applies these mouchette wheels. Actually, this is bad, I apologize, I'm just going backwards. We should be able to see, oh yes, here's the altar rail. You can see quatrefoil, mouchette, wheel, quatrefoil on each side. They form, the mouchette wheel forms the letter S. So a suggestion posited about 50 years ago by the first significant historian of George is that it's effectively him stamping his initial on all his work. This is George Shaw, which is plausible. I haven't found, well, there's no reason to not suspect it. And if you actually look at the back here between the gables, you can see the mouchette. Oh, the mouse has now disappeared. Sorry, I'm not allowed to move away from is that? No, you can't see the mouse at all. Anyway, if you look very carefully behind the canopies, you can see pairs of mouchette wheels everywhere. Right. Talking of, oh gosh, this goes on and on and on. He added a chapel to Mottram in Longdendale Church. It's actually quite remarkable in the ways in which he has engaged with Tudor material and Tudor decoration. Notice the diaper on the posts, once again, the mouchette wheels, and also this horizontal band of repeating, almost micro ornament bratishing. It is everywhere, George's work. And actually, although reconfigured, it's a really quite striking example of ornate Gothic woodwork set within his reconfiguration of the chapel. And notably, once again, here are pieces of painted glass by Shaw. Notice the wasted, the hourglass shield on the left-hand side and right-hand side, and also the right-hand side is cusped. So this is a cusped hourglass escutcheon. George loved them everywhere. And if you fringe them with mantling, even better. And what he has created in these interiors is informed by the work that he saw when he was out traveling the country, selling cloth, or independently, just going to visit places. And also what he believed was right for not only himself, but his clients. What he produced himself in his own house, he repeated for his clients. So chapels for local well-to-do were, of course, in George's romantic style that leaned heavily upon Tudor material. This is an example of two folios from his sketchbook of Tabley Old Hall. And you can see, for example, the concentration upon, I mean, I'm not going to comment on the quality of the helmet on the left-hand side, but arms, armor, the general form of the furniture, notice the ones with banderole and the style of lettering, plus also the chimney piece and heraldry. We're going to focus on a detail he recorded of the chimney in the overmantel. He writes, and Shaw has fundamentally broken my ability to spell gorgeous because I've transcribed it so often. That's how he spells it. The chimney piece is a gorgeous relic of which some faint idea may be caught from the sketch of the hall. It is partly painted and gilt and part of the original oak colour. This is what I love. The furniture is not comparable with the room. It has been picked up and is very poor. There are some old swords and different pieces of plate armor, and there's also a very curious old battle axe, not unlike that which I bought at Kendal. He is incredibly opinionated. He knows what's good, he knows what's bad, and actually he shows some discrimination in what he collects in terms of the quality, plus also responds to the practical realities of his living, i.e. he is not especially affluent, therefore can't pick up pieces made available to him, quite often through ferreting around, knocking on doors, or just bursting in. So he responds to certain practical considerations. Gosh, there's so much to say. As any decent antiquary would do, having amassed his own collection, he produces a manuscript volume recording said collection, where they came from. And also you can see it is illustrated by hand in a rather romantic fashion. What I'd like to comment on is this this reproduction of a piece of painted glass that George records in his diary one night, going by cart, seeing shining, the candlelight shining through a piece of glass displayed in the window of a cottage, which shows here the dismembered, collared bull's head. This is the family crest of the Radcliffes. George, through his maternal line of the Radcliffes, had to have it. He assumed it came from Radcliffe Tower, therefore he acquired it, added it, incorporated it within his house. Other examples we can see on the right-hand side, this is the watercolour by his younger brother, John Radcliffe Shaw, really celebrating the quality of the material. Anyway, I will run out of time, I apologise. So I'm going to focus a little bit on St. Chad's, what he did to it, and then move on to some of his other work. I think it's in 1823 he starts this manuscript we see on the left-hand side. I apologize for the incredibly poor quality. This is a photocopy. This is a scan of a photocopy of a microfilm of the original. We've got no idea where the original is, but it is a 200-page manuscript, chronicles of the shores of Shaw Hall and of the Radcliffes of Radcliffe Tower, etc., or and, etc., etc., etc. Notice the faux medieval manuscript illuminations, borders, etc. This is George's compilation of his own family ancestry in a style that responds to everything he loves: heraldry, manuscripts, and ancient buildings, in particular buildings belonging to the family. The image that's on the center of the screen is what Shaw did to the house being built and shown here on the lower right-hand side. That was rebuilt by his uncle, Thomas, in 1807 to 1808. And George Shaw found it deeply dissatisfactory on every single level. It was basically boring. A standard late Georgian house. It was not a grand country house of the quality of Shaw Hall or Radcliffe Tower. And he writes about it, and I've made a horrific miscalculation. I thought I could read the manuscript, which I can't. In it, he writes that the old house, right-hand side, second building on the plot, this is the third building. It replaced a building from the 17th century that by the turn of the 19th century was showing its age. The walls were parting, the roof needed work, needed to be re-roofed, and the owner had to make a decision between fixing it or rebuilding it. And alas, he decided to rebuild it. He replaced something, a 17th century building, with the marks of age shown on the walls, and he replaced it with a straight, flat, plain, boring, unimaginative house. To George Shaw, this was deeply ineffectual, and he went around and covered it in heraldry, added gables, and his theory was, although we've got no idea what the previous house to this looked like, it should have looked a bit like what he had done or decided to do, because other houses within the family should also have had such gables. There's no evidence of those gables now, George writes, and there should have been some there. So he is speculatively reconstructing something which he's got no actual knowledge of, but he was so absolutely convinced what he was doing was correct. This is what he produced for himself. This is the entrance hall. If you remember back to the 1715 royal achievement, that is, and the Barrowshaw bed, that is what you see in the middle. The room is awash with arms and armor that he had picked up piece by piece. The furniture, the room, the wall paneling, everything had been produced by Shaw and Shaw's workmen, starting in 1830 with working on the library. The library, what is today the Children's Library. And it's an evening activity where he's producing bookcases with niches for sculpture. They've disappeared. I want to know where they are, but he describes them in quite specific detail. Anyway, he and various hands produced, they fashioned this interior. And one of the most important people in relation to arms and armor is Sir Samuel Rush Meyrick. Shaw built parts of Goodrich Court for Sir Samuel. He also furnished parts of the interior and some of the woodwork from Goodrich by George, notably the linen-fold panels. George has a very specific type of linen-fold that if you see it, you know it's George. That linen-fold for Goodrich has been moved elsewhere. Anyway, I'm mindful of time. Paraphrasing one of George's notable antiquarian contacts, Dearden of Rochdale Manor, is having a bit of a fit, or perhaps it's actually George wanting to know whether a license to crenellate was required in the 19th century, to which Sir Samuel says, I don't think so. You're a few centuries out of date. But what's exciting, and this is what I came across a few days ago, this is a letter from Goodrich Court dated 1843. Dear Shaw, this is Sir Samuel writing to Shaw in familiar terms. Shaw goes to Goodrich along with senior heralds from the College of Arms, and they seem to have antiquarian parties. Sir Samuel writes to Shaw basically saying that he is more than happy to append his name to the petition for Francis Rains, one of George's close antiquarian connections, to be proposed for membership to this very learned society. And if you can see at the top, AB of a gentleman, very convenient with the history. Well, you know, these are the qualifications. This is Sir Samuel writing to George saying that he is happy to append his signature to the blue paper. However, if there are more suitable people who know Rains a bit better, go with those. So this is really a good litmus test, I think, for showing how well-connected Shaw was to significant antiquaries. Of course, Sir Samuel was the leading authority on arms and armor, and he actually left Shaw arms and armor and also gave him examples. Shaw wrote an awful lot, and this is slightly out of context here, but this is an incredibly detailed description of the interior of Chetham's library, which the librarians are deeply confused by because apparently there is a tester bed stuck in a cupboard in the library building, which we can't actually work out where that cupboard is today, and or apparently, according to this description, Mr. Crossley, the governor, he was not the governor, George's diary is not right there, has converted Chetham's library into a romantic interior full of arms, armour, and notable beds. Yes, I'm going to read from a third of the way down. The furniture was Yes, the furniture was partly old and partly modern, with a beautiful carved oak table with a Viscount's coronet on front of it. The room has a beautiful effect and shows what taste can effect even in one of the clumsiest of our ancient edifices. The dining room that is used by the wardens, etc., on collegiate occasions is a fine wainscoted room, with a deep oriel window. That's the oriel window where Marx and Engels wrote their Communist Manifesto. And entirely furnished with ancient oak furniture, upon one piece of which was an inscription to the effect that Humphrey Chetham, the founder of the college, had also presented that with other articles of furniture. Over the fireplace is a portrait of him, and a prime sage-looking old gentleman he seems. There is a little stained glass in the windows. It goes on. This is interesting. What George Shaw's referring to here is actually today almost like it's a very curious Victorian bookcase I mean, this is an awful term, and Michael's going to be giving me some interesting facial expressions. A shelving unit. It's a converted four-poster bed that's been turned into a bookcase. A very, very strange thing. That's what George is talking about. It wasn't given by Humphrey Chetham. It was converted from bed to this curious bookcase before being gifted to the library in 1827. Anyway, this is George showing his interest in going to notable buildings and also the people that he's circulating around. His great love, and when I was indexing this book, which took an awful long time, and there are 3 indexes actually, 1 for the books he read, 2 for the buildings he visits, and 3 for the people and concepts. Sir Walter Scott's novels and poetry and Abbotsford are particularly significant. He writes, for example, of Abbotsford, and he goes to Abbotsford every single time he goes to Melrose without exception. He's always there. And Sir Walter Scott one night was having dinner. The member of staff responded to George's knock on the door and said, Sir Walter is having dinner. I'm sorry you can't come in. But George eventually got access to the house. And actually in the 1840s, he finally realized the strange smell in Abbotsford after having visited this building for about 20 years, multiple times a year, to see the bookcases. Anyway, he writes of Abbotsford. The room is as dark as any of the old baronial halls and has a truly romantic appearance when first seen, which does not decrease on the nearer and closer examination. There's a door between the 2 armed statues, over which are a number of coats of arms of Sir Walter's particular friends and acquaintances. The room leading from the armory is the drawing room, an enchanting apartment filled up with a taste which bespeaks of a poet and a man of genius. The chairs in the room are an imitation of old ones, although they are modern. They are of the reed-back kind and of exquisite workmanship. I'm not going to labor over the language being used by George, but the language being used is really, really telling. Romantic, exquisite workmanship. I think it's great. And no surprise, here on the right-hand side is the armory at Abbotsford, Sir Walter Scott's house. Left-hand side is the entrance hall to George Shaw's house. He creates for himself a miniature Yorkshire Abbotsford. And George, too, whilst he didn't write novels, he certainly wrote an awful lot. He's a bit confusing. He's actually a bit more than a bit confusing. the image on the left-hand side, we can see the exterior of the chapel, which I mentioned before when he extended the property, as of course any decent, and I realize this is not a St. Chad's, this is a detailed photograph of St. Chad's, this is not a country house. However, George Shaw is presenting it as a country house, and therefore you need to have a chapel. The image on the right-hand side is the interior of the chapel, and it really pays to interrogate what's going on. Not only did he build it, but he furnished it using spolia that was emerging from old churches in the neighborhood being pulled down and rebuilt, notably the church in Uppermill. There's a Norman doorway which you can't see, that still stands and is reputed to have come from that church. I think, curiously, Shaw writes about the rood screen, which you can see on the image on the right-hand side, and also the rood. This, once again, is reputed to have come from the local church and of the time of Edward I. If you notice, you can see two smaller figures to the side of the crucified Christ. But if you look over to the right-hand side of the rood, can you notice anything curious? There's a helmet perched on there. On the left-hand side, there's something, I'm not entirely sure. If we continue moving our way around the chapel, we can see pikes piled up in the corner. We can see, obviously, the font. This is not a font that George produced, but it's, I think, well, wait to see. The pulpit, definitely by George, of George style. If we move over to the upper left-hand side portion of the wall, you can see a suit of armor hung from the wall. Oh, there's also, I'm not entirely sure where, but there's also a gauntlet, just sort of like this. This is curious. George was deeply religious. He went to church twice on Sundays. He was very close to numerous vicars, very, very close actually to Francis Raines, one of the founders of the Cheetham Society. And also he and Raines went on tours around the country together. And Raines effectively was a tutor to George in heraldry, which is a whole other subject and talk. George was deeply religious. Looking at this chapel interior, what would you say were his religious leanings? A bit confused. He's no Pugin. At the point of Catholic emancipation, he writes in his diary, and this is perhaps not the most politically sensitive way of putting it, I don't much care for the Catholics. George and George's family were deeply connected to the church in England, was not a fanatic like Pugin was about Catholicism. However, the material trappings of the Catholic Church clearly appealed to him, in particular through their age and also local significance. And I think that's really interesting. George and George's seriousness to antiquarian studies were also slightly filtered through rose-tinted glasses towards this love of the past and wanting to create a sense of, without necessarily having all the substance, perhaps. I don't know. I'm still trying to work him out. This is something that's, to furniture historians, become deeply controversial. This bed was photographed in 1913 when it was sold at auction. It was in the possession of one of Shaw's contacts, James Dearden of Rochdale Manor. And it's also interesting that my photograph of this auction catalogue print has been sort of doing the rounds. It's been assumed that footboards are Victorian, and that these footboards are Victorian, and ditto for the canopy. Some other evidence suggesting that footboards are perhaps not Victorian is, I've suggested that. Anyway, crucially, there is a record by George in his diary for 1834, which goes as follows. Went with Mr. Raines to see a carved oak bed in the possession of Mr. Dearden once in Latham House. The back is profusely carved, but in a different style from that of any other I ever saw. The pillars are also carved and have crests upon them. Naughty George, they're not crests, they're coats of arms. The pillars are also carved. The tester is likewise carved. It is being repaired and will have a fine effect when complete if the repairs are done with taste. So it's showing George's connection. This bed during the 19th century was progressively deconstructed by the antiques trade along the lines of what it was thought Tudor beds should look like. So it started off, as we can see on the right-hand side, in 1913, and by the 1970s looked like that on the left. That's apparently what the bed should have looked like. The other bits, the canopy, the footboard, I mean, the bed's also disappeared to somewhere in America, but I think irrespective, we can assume, based upon George's diary entry, that that bed looked something along the lines of that when he saw it in 1834. Tudor bed made for presumably the first Earl of Derby, Henry VII's stepfather. Yes, he married Lady Margaret Beaufort. George has, through his network, an incredible array of material culture that he seized and used, and he produced, notice, the diaper posts. George called them profusely carved. No, sorry, he called them, oh, sorry, he also says the pillars are also carved. He used the material knowledge he's acquired through his own collecting, and also the styles, as I've suggested, his repeated use of the mouchette wheel ad nauseum, and bratishing, and diaper, and Lindfield paneling, give George's work away. He was a prolific recycler in architecture and in furniture. And I've just come back, actually, from the Duke of Northumberland's collection at Alnwick and related work that's now at Warkworth Castle in Northumberland, to look at what happens when enthusiastic antiquaries go slightly rogue. The bed on the left-hand side is produced for, we've got absolutely no idea. I'm assuming Sir Samuel Rush Meyrick. What we do know is it's got royal coats of arms on the headboard and HR on the headboard posts, Henricus Rex with the portcullis and the rose on the footboard. So our understanding is that it's perhaps the Henricus Rex, Henry VII bed. What we see on the right-hand side is my bad, awful photoshopped reconstruction of what Shaw sent to the Duke of Northumberland in the 1840s as, and that's what it looked like when it was sold in the 20th century, as a genuine family relic. It's in the same style, is a most magnificent bedstead, which he sold for £70 in his first letter. Then it was upgraded to £80 as he went along. And this has been written about quite extensively, actually. George Shaw repeatedly duped numerous aristocrats, in particular in the north of England, with furniture his workmen produced alongside, frankly, their church furniture. But Shaw's letters, Shaw's correspondence, frame these modern productions as genuine Tudor and or historical relics belonging to local aristocrats. Not only does he recycle the same ploys, the same letters, but also the same pieces of furniture with the heraldry substituted to fit the appropriate aristocrat's family. On the right-hand side, the 3 fusils, those diamonds should actually be 5, which is a bit of a giveaway. And this is an example of the bed. It was loosely based upon the Dowse bed at Goodrich. Similarly, he supplied this, he called it a sideboard to the 4th Duke of Northumberland with, once again, 3 fusils. He also supplied the exact same model of sideboards to the 13th Earl of Derby in the middle. I wrote about that in the Antiquary, which has just come out. And there are yet other examples. There's one on the right-hand side for Sir Nicholas Mosley. They go on and on. I think this is the bed he died in. And I think this really sums up Shaw. This is his bedroom at St. Chad's. It's an amalgam of old bed parts, old chest fronts, which have been augmented significantly on the canopy with the royal coat of arms, on the headboard with local families' coats of arms to create what is in effect the Radcliffe family bed for Ordsall Hall, which never actually existed. And when Shaw went to Ordsall Hall, he bemoaned the complete lack of any ancient furniture. He fixed that by making something for himself. He never produced this as a fake, but he produced it in the guise of an ancient bed specific to his ancestors at Ordsall. It is at Ordsall Hall today, and it's celebrated as the oldest bed on the planet, I think. It's not quite the case, but that's the bed that George passed away in, and it really symbolizes how he combined design, woodwork, heraldry, and a sense of romantic recreations of what history has taken away, and he just loved to fill the gaps. I could go on and on and on, just to say the breadth and depth of Shaw's work is yet to be entirely pinned down, not only his architecture, but also his furniture and work on houses for families in and around the north of England, but also that we know he worked for, but also for families we've got no idea that he's ever been in contact with. So he's sorry, I feel this is slightly incoherent. He's a really challenging figure because we know so much through his diaries, through his approaches, through his opinions, but at the same time, the manuscripts connected to his work they've either disappeared, are poorly catalogued, not catalogued, or exist in private collections. So he's this undiscovered country that is both deeply religious, but also wonderfully whimsical, and also loves heraldry, although gets it wrong quite a lot. But that heraldry is the saving grace because you can always work out, or we can try and work out who he's worked for. So his love of heraldry as this central antiquarian skill is central to trying to decode his work, and it's probably going to be a life's work to try and work out this very curious person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. What a curious character this man
was.
was.
I mean, there's more to say, such as, for example, when he went, oh gosh, this is me, when he went to Scotland, instead of actually selling cloth, he exchanged the cloth he sold for, as he called it, Highland costume. When he returned to Uppermill, he then went around wearing his Highland costume, burst through, kicked the door down to the cottage of one of his closest friends, wearing said kilt, with 2 pistols, and upturned the table and went, ha ha. Theatricality turned up as much as his enthusiasm for everything old.
His architecture is theatrical as well. Can I open this up for questions and comments? Clearly, you're opening up a whole area of study, which is fascinating.
He also comments on Strawberry Hill.
Thank you very much. Did he have a family, or was he, all his money was going on acquiring these objects?
Yes, so he was a member of a rather extended family, 8 siblings, not all of which lasted particularly long. This is really interesting. He died a bachelor, and there are, through his diaries, and this is a really, really challenging thing actually when I was looking at his manuscripts, there is a propensity towards very close friendships with men. Women don't feature at all. His descriptions of his encounters with men are, given how detailed he is otherwise, sometimes surprisingly brief. There's a newly discovered manuscript that suggests there's along the lines of what notable scholars have done and written about Walpole and Strawberry Hill. I think there's actually quite a lot of evidence for sure that he was, well, he can be queered. So The Intimacies, the title of the book of his writing, it's intimacies in that sense. It's not sexual until the late 19th century, but he does have very, very intimate connections with men. But yes, that's the surprising thing actually, and also rather surprising is for someone who is so absolutely fixated upon genealogy, heraldry, lineage, looking backwards, and positioning himself within a context, why, given everything that he's acquired, everything he's done, is there no will? I mean, there are some theories, but yes, he's really, really sad, actually. Or it's sad that it just stopped. This is like my PhD viva all over again.
No. Well, what I was just wondering how the timing of the furniture, which presumably is a way of making money, is it a sideline to his architectural practice, or does it come afterwards, or and who was the first person he diddled? I mean, the first aristocrat who fell.
Yes. So this is where his diaries are entirely unhelpful. There is no, the moment where he starts building himself as an untrained architect, although he does actually send one of the former wool dyeing hands off to Huddersfield to be trained as an architect. He appears to be commissioning architectural projects at St. Chad's, whilst simultaneously himself working with wood and also some hands within the mill working in wood to produce furniture for himself. So my hypothesis is that they develop in parallel. He seems to be from the 1840s doing both particularly well, if repetitive. But the actual evidence for when they start building proper, producing furniture proper, we don't at the moment have it. I'm hopeful that there are things out there which other people will be able to find. So in tandem, I think, although they are producing freestanding furniture and also over mantles from the 1830s. In terms of the first person he duped, I'm not entirely sure. And the reason I say that is that we've got correspondence, and I've transcribed the correspondence. And actually, I apologize for this. One of the things, Shaw's forgeries for the Duke of Northumberland have been written about by a couple of people over the years. And one of the most remarkable things, which I went through the correspondence in entirety, is that not only did Shaw started this process by saying, I know someone who has got furniture that needs to remain anonymous, it's from your ancestors, and I'm doing you a favor acting as an intermediary. Once he's got the hook in the mouth, he then rather excitedly, like he seems to run his whole life, then sends more and more and more. Of course, ancient furniture from the Tudor period and 16th and 17th century, removed from an aristocratic family's country house, does not survive in bulk anywhere. You know, this is basically Wardour Street, but specific, bespoke to the family. What Shaw does halfway through, after he starts just sending stuff to Alnwick, as you do, is actually part of the way through when the Duke is getting slightly suspicious. There's a bit too much in the Herald, is also wrong, by the way. Shaw produces a scheme for how that furniture should be arranged within Alnwick. So Shaw is actually producing for the Duke of Northumberland a template to romantically furnish or romantically refurnish Alnwick with the furniture that originally came from other Percy family properties. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it's an absolute template for which pieces of furniture go where within the castle, the effects it creates. It's brilliant, actually. It just shows his sort of ridiculous self-confidence, really. So I'm not going to say who's first, because we've got these three cases. The Duke of Bradford or Bridgeman. I can never. They both begin with a B, so my brain can't get them right. It's Duke of Northumberland, it's the Earl of Bradford, isn't it? Well, it's the Earl of Derby, but there's also it's in the index. The family's Earl of Bradford. There we go. There are others. There are other clients with exact. There are other clients with sideboards that exactly match the sideboards that Shaw produced for the Duke of Northumberland. The Mosleys, the Earl of Derby, there are more. The question is, how many more? Because the correspondence hasn't come to light yet. So I'm not prepared to say quite who was first. However, there are senses of deception going on throughout his diaries in the 1830s and 1840s, particularly, yes, in the 1830s, but not of this type.
Yeah, very interesting. A couple of points occurred to me. I mean, you slightly alluded to it there yourself. Is it not, in many ways, it's arrogance on his part that he's actually really saying, I know what's good for you. I know rather better than you do. And at the other point, I was thinking, how does the furniture world regard him today? Do people collect George Shaw, for example?
So, absolute arrogance, and even as an 18, and this is actually staggering to, to try and think, put yourself in the position of an 18-year-old. He's absolutely arrogant. He's forthright in his position. He knows he is right. He knows what is good, and woe betide anyone who does anything that doesn't fit with his consideration of what is correct. So Gothic churches need to have lots of ornament. There was one Gothic church where the ornament was painted with black in the recesses to try and augment the chiaroscuric effect is a complete nonsense, complete waste of time. That if when you get close to the building, that sense of grandeur and ornament from far away disappears, deeply dissatisfying. Abbotsford, actually, frankly, he writes of Abbotsford that actually he was the first time he visits in 1830. He writes, the distance is called rather better than 3 miles, having come from Melrose, which is amazing. The situation is not near so romantic as it might have been expected, such as a poet as Sir Walter Scott would have chosen for erecting his house upon. I mean, good grief, this is George as a 19-year-old, yes, 19-year-old, ripping into Sir Walter Scott for choosing a poor location for Abbotsford. It's ridiculous. But at the same time, it's wonderful because he really propagates the sense of what's good, what's bad. Picturesque, planting churches around with ivy is amazing. In terms of collecting furniture, there are some collectors, particularly those who know about Shaw. One person I've met recently who owns one Shaw building, has previously owned another one, is really fascinated with. So yes, there is a market, and actually J. Paul Getty purchased this bed from the Duke of Northumberland, and then it was sold subsequently. Yeah, so there is an appeal, but to be honest, he's not exactly a household name. Although maybe I'm going to get him there, and others, I should say.
One imagines that he must have had on tap an armorial smithy and architectural furniture craftsmen, as indeed did the later architects of the Gothic Revival, Pugin, Street, Butterfield and Bodley, who were all quite straightforward about this. But I wondered how much you had found of such demonstrably allied workshops producing all this stuff, because that quantity of armour must have been mainly produced for him. And of course, the bedsteads and the buffets and so on. And I wonder whether there is a similar feature of craft employment in his case that one sees with the later men.
Yes, so once again, we have some evidence of this, not a lot, but it's recorded in the obituary of his partner architect's son that Shaw employed up to 100 people in his architectural design practice. Quite what those 100 people did, bearing in mind that the practice existed in one form or another for 35 years or so, quite a significant period of time. We simply don't have the record at the moment. I mean, I would like to find, and you're not the first person to ask about it. Yeah. No, it is, and actually it's really quite hilarious having this the first time I've seen this headboard in person. It's been stripped. It was originally in Shaw's dark, thick varnish. It's absolutely obviously new. And similarly, the sideboards, where are they? The sideboards at Warkworth. I mean, good grief. They're ridiculous. They're absolutely ridiculously new. Although the ways in which he's producing them is interesting, and I could do a sidebar on that, which would take us well over time. But he uses old furniture, which he then augments either through additional carving added to the top sides or adds feet, etc. So he's using some old wood, but a lot of it is new carved wood. Quite often fast-grown oak, carved in the green. And this, here we go, the front right post on the left-hand image looks like it's terribly bad photography. It's not. It's that front right post has got a really open grain, and when it dried, it had basically a disco party going on for the for about 50 years or so, and it's just all over the place. So he's literally churning it out, and the bratishing which we see on both these horizontal curved patterns, that is produced, and someone who's seen those has indicated it's been mechanically reproduced, basically traced out. He produced certain patterns literally by the mile, I think. He's literally been carved out and just chopped up and used, added on to whichever piece of furniture. In terms of knowledge, he's actually, George Shaw's wonderfully connected, as we know, and he writes about, and this is wonderful actually, he writes about coming across through Francis Rains, Heraldica Lancastria by Jesse Lee in 3 volumes, written from 1826 to 1833. It's a 3-volume, oh gosh, 700 folio account of all the armorials of all the families in the area. So he doesn't need to consult Burke. He's got a manuscript which was being shared around the Antiquarian network, and he was consulting this as an 18-year-old. And wonderfully, that manuscript exists today at Manchester Central Library. You can go and have a look at it. It's brilliant to be able to, when I was doing research on Shaw, to reconsult the same manuscripts that he consulted 100 and something years, well, 95 years before. It's brilliant. Yeah. But he's quite how he does it, we don't know. And obviously over that 35-year period, there's a difference between producing a piece of furniture, obviously, and building a church. Quite a difference. But it's the allied, it's the way in which Shaw manages to insert all these different practices into his one output. So a building contains his visual language, so the barbed hourglass escutcheon everywhere, and carved work and stonework. It's all connected. Quite how it is connected, don't know yet. But it's something that I think is actually, frankly, really exciting to try and piece together how he actually operated. And whilst he initially started working out of St. Chad's, so the buildings to the right have now been pulled down, he started work actually in the house. Goodness knows what his parents thought. And frankly, when he was going on tour, he was purchasing things as and where, including what he called the Tutbury chairs, of which I'm not entirely sure what the Tutbury chairs look like. He sort of describes them, but not in sufficient detail. He just buys them and just gets them sent home. So his parents and siblings are at home. Obviously, the house didn't quite look like this then, and just things would start arriving. So and also, frankly, to parents to let an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old start reconfiguring and romanticizing their house around them is rather curious. I think there's an interesting dynamic going on there, which once again, we don't quite know, but there's a lot about Shaw that's deeply exciting, but also deeply mysterious, and it's going to take decades to try and pin him down, I think. But what I know is he's very exciting. Well, at least I find him exciting. I hope you do too.
Peter, you've the breadth and depth of your research come out very clearly in the questions as well as the lecture. So can we thank you again for a splendid talk? I give notice that the next meeting will be on Thursday, the 1st of May, when it will be the Society's anniversary meeting. The meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Western trains to blame, not.
Great. I mean, trade descriptions, like, there's nothing